It's 10 times the terror.
Hello there! Getting old and senile.
Hi, and welcome to 10 Times the Terror. My name is Ralph,
And I'm Paul.
and today we are going to do Houses of Terror. We're going to start off with The House on Haunted Hill. And I'd like to just kind of 1959 thriller, a very popular film that was directed by William Castle. I'd like to just share with you the trailer because it's a great trailer. So stand by. We're going to put that trailer on right now for you to listen to. Sounds pretty scary, huh, Paul?
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember seeing it in the theater. It was remade in the 90s, but not nearly as effectively. And William Castle was famous for having all these gimmicks.
Yeah,
in his
hold on a
movies.
second. Let's just finish up this trailer.
Yeah, finish the trailer, right.
I'm Watson Pritchard. In just a minute, I'll show you the only really haunted house in the world. Since it was built a century ago, 7 people, including my brother, have been murdered in it.
Whoa.
Since then, I've owned the house. I've only spent one night there, and when they found me in the morning, I was almost dead.
Okay, that house, by the way, is just going up for sale again for the 19th time. You can pick it up for $2,400. So it's a great deal if you can survive. But I think it's a great film. So go ahead, Paul. Tell us a little bit about the film.
Well, the thing is, it's William Castle, who was played by John Goodman in a film a few years ago. Was an exploitive producer-director of The First Order. And when I saw the film, they had it set up at a critical point that a skeleton comes out of the screen along the ceiling of the theater, over the top of the audience. You know, everybody was screaming with that kind of thing. His most famous thing was a film he did after this called The Tingler, where they had electric currents, small electric currents in certain seats, which is supposed to give you the sense of the tingler taking over your body. So, needless to say, this was all great showbiz kind of stuff. There is this scene of like an old hag, kind of witch figure that shows up in the film.
Hey, watch it. That's my wife.
Yeah, right. Well, the thing is that haunted houses, old dark houses have been a staple in movies, you know, from the very beginning. And you go back to The Old Dark House that James Whale, who directed Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and The Invisible Man, did with a lot of black humor. It's sort of that same kind of thing here. Another very popular one in the silent era was The Cat and the Canary. And again, these are films that had kind of a black humor, but they were all set in haunted houses. That was remade later on with Bob Hope. So you can see where that had kind of a carryover sort of thing. We'll talk a little bit later about some Abbott and Costello rings on this idea. But it's the idea of the haunted house is a standard bit. If you can spend a night in the house and be alive in the morning and dawn, then you've managed to escape the curse.
Yeah, I mean, there was didn't Agatha Christie do something like with the 12 people or whatever it was? What was the name of that film?
And Then There Were None.
Then There Were None, yeah.
Filmed many times, for several times, and once filmed as 10 Little Indians, and so for the alternate title. Right. There's that idea. There's actually a Sherlock Holmes movie mentioned, The House of Fear, where you have this group of it's like a club of these good fellows, and one by one they're all dying horrible deaths, kind of thing, and it's a a spooky house kind of deal.
Yeah,
so I was going to just add, and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis did a takeoff on it called Scared Stiff. So
Right.
it's and needless to say, on TV versions, especially doing spoofs, Carol Burnett and all that sort of stuff, I've all done kind of spooky haunted house themes, always with big thunderstorms and flashes of lightning and all that sort of stuff. And that's all here in the House on Haunted Hill.
I guess we should, I guess we should say a little bit about the film itself. It starred Vincent Price, who was used in a wonderful number of films, including The Fly and so many more. But he's this eccentric millionaire, and along with his wife Annabelle, they invite 5 people to spend the night in the haunted house. And at midnight, the doors get locked, so you can't get out. And anyone who's willing to stay there gets if they can survive, they get $10,000. And of course, as the night goes on, there's an assortment of terrors. And if you haven't seen the film, I don't want to give you the ending, but it's a great film. It's it's not so much a spook film as a spoof. It's kind of like part terror, but it has that campiness that's kind of a fun movie to watch with your friends and just get a lot of laughs out of. I think there was a similar film. Well, there were actually, I could remember because I was a kid at the time going to see these films. There were 2 others that were very much in a similar kind of vein. There was Macabre, and then 13 Ghosts.
13 Ghosts,
and 13 Ghosts didn't have the wires with the skeleton going across, but it did have this, I forget what it was, Paul. Was it a mask or something that you wore and you could see it in 3D? I think it was a ghost, something, a ghostolator or something it was called. Yeah. You put it on and you could see the ghost. And
you could see ghosts that you couldn't otherwise. Yeah.
Right. It was quite effective. Quite effective.
Yeah. This is, of course, we got to update. This is a 1959 movie. They didn't need to put these things into sort of perspective. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the horror film in Hollywood had come to an end a couple of times. Overuse, or people got upset with it. We saw a similar kind of thing with what was called torture porn. Right in the late 1990s, with all the multiple versions of Friday the 13th and Halloween, and just grisly stuff upon grisly stuff. So the horror film has at times had a bad rap, and people have stayed away from it. But then it gets brought back.
Right.
And so, whereas from the late for a good 10 years, very few horror films were being done. That all changed with The Curse of Frankenstein, one of the most influential movies really now in history. And there was a flood then, because that was so incredibly successful. There was a huge flood then of trying to do horror films of some kind or other, and to get them out as soon as possible. And House on Haunted Hill is a good example of that. It's a B, what we call a B movie. It's not an expensive movie, but you've got Elisha Cook Jr., who's the heir of the house, and of course Vincent Price is wonderful, and there are twists and turns. It's really a murder mystery, but it's given that setting of the supernatural, the haunted house. There's a couple of stories to mention in this. E.F. Benson wrote, who's not a name that most people know today, wrote all kinds of horror stories, ghost stories in the late 19th century. And he had one called The Room in the Tower, which is, again, the same kind of principle. Another one by H.G. Wells. You think of H.G. Wells being involved with science fiction, and rightly so. But he wrote a short story that'll scare the pants off you called The Red Room. And it's the same classic idea of, can you spend a full night in this haunted room and survive? And needless to say, $10,000 back in 1959 would be like at least a couple $100,000 probably in today's world.
A couple of interesting points here is the house that they used was actually designed by the architect Franklin Lloyd Wright, which of course is a famous name.
Sure.
And the other thing is, I don't know if you know this, Paul, but Hitchcock took notice of this film and realized that it was such a huge success on such a small budget that he thought he would make a low-budget film of a similar horror nature, and it was Psycho.
Yeah, yeah.
So
right.
this film inspired Hitchcock to do Psycho.
Yeah.
And I think Psycho was a little more popular and probably brought a few dollars more.
Oh, yeah. Needless to say. Well, I think Hitchcock would have been affected by the, again, like the rebirth of the English horror films, too. We'll talk about that a little bit in another context. But again, Curse of Frankenstein, which was, now that was in bright color. But that just changed the whole scope of things. But right, clearly Hitchcock would have been picked up on things like House on Haunted Hill. Also, the Val Lewton films of the 1940s, which were like psychological horror thrillers. And there literally is one, The Seventh Victim, where the victim is in a shower, and it's not a murderer, but a threatening person comes in, and she's scared, in the shower. There's also a similar thing a year before Psycho in the Orson Welles film with Janet Leigh, Touch of Evil, where Janet Leigh is threatened in an old rundown motel. I mean, Hitchcock's antecedents in Psycho are pretty easy to spot.
Right.
They're in a bunch of films. But you're right, this is clearly one of them. And the idea that something about the haunted houses always have a certain amount of comedy to them. We're going to talk a little bit about Abbott and Costello in a minute here, right, Ralph?
Yeah, that's right, because we wanted to talk a little bit about the second film, 1941. Now we're going back many years before House on Haunted Hill, but it just came out right after Buck Privates. It was Abbott and Costello's second film.
Actually, it was their third.
It was their third, okay.
In the Navy was the second one.
Right, okay. And it was a huge success.
That's funny, Molly. I remember Abbott and Costello at the end of this point were the #1 box office stars in America. I mean, never mind, Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, Betty Davis. They outdrew everybody. They were hugely popular.
What's interesting is that they made that film, and it was a huge success for Universal. They made that film on a budget of $190,000.
Yeah, which is like nothing.
And imagine the profits that Universal made on that film. I mean, still today is a well-known film.
That's why they were #1 box office. Now you notice, thinking ahead of the sci-fi films, the 50 we talked about, Richard Carlson is in Hold That Ghost.
Is that right?
Yeah, he's like the male lead, much younger than he is like in. It Came from Outer Space and Creature from the Black Lagoon. But yeah, he's in that. And what kind of, to look at how that panned out, horror films had reached kind of an end point in the mid 30s, and by 1936, none were being in production. And the stars like Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and even Lionel Atwill were all out of work in the Depression for several years. And what happened was just trying to, and Universal went bankrupt, and Carl Laemmle lost control of the studio. It was sold, but the studio just on a whim of some kind released Frankenstein and Dracula on a double bill in the summer of 1938, and it was, I think, and it also included King Kong, if I remember right. Huge success, hugely popular, and with that in mind, they went in and scheduled Son of Frankenstein, which we're going to talk about at some point, down the road here too. But at the same time, they also had, as a great musical figure, Deanna Durbin, not a name people know too much today, but she was enormously popular as a singer, and she emerges out of the Universal in the late 1930s, and then they get Abbott and Costello. So the new Universal was riding high in the early 40s with a three-pronged attack. And so it didn't take long for them to figure out, let's start going on some of these together. There was Deanna Durbin never was put in one of the horror films, but she was apparently considered for that. But to get Abbott and Costello into any kind of a quasi-horror film, which and they were going to do all kinds of later with monsters, but at this point, 1941, that was an obvious idea. Because by Son of Frankenstein was, again, enormously successful, had an all-star horror cast with Basil Rathbone in the lead, Boris Karloff as the monster, Bela Lugosi as Igor, and Lionel Atwill as Inspector Crow, who's got the wooden arm that he sticks the darts in.
Yeah.
And so they followed that up very quickly with another horror film called Man-Made Monster, which introduced Lon Chaney Jr. into the mix. And so by 1941, they were trying to combine horror and comedy and kind of get all these things together. They did a film, I just mentioned in passing, that is pretty forgettable, called The Black Cat. That's the same year as they did the Abbott and Costello Hold That Ghost. That's not to be confused with the 1934 masterpiece of Edgar Ulmer with Karloff and Lugosi. But this Black Cat starred Basil Rathbone and Broderick Crawford, and Bela Lugosi was in it. And it was an attempt to be kind of a horror spoof. Yeah. And it kind of falls flat. But to the contrary, Hold That Ghost was just perfect.
Yeah, I guess.
Go ahead.
I guess we should say something about the home video. House on Haunted Hill has been released on Blu-ray. It's a gorgeous copy. I've seen it. Unfortunately, for reasons completely baffling to me, none of the Abbott and Costello films have been released except for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. All of them have been released, but the only one is the Frankenstein film that's been released on Blu-ray, and it's gorgeous. And, you kind of wish they would continue that and make a full box set of Abbott and Costello Blu-ray. I mean, you can't say that they wouldn't have, retail sale quality or gosh, there are so many fans out there that would love to see these films restored. It's still a good copy, but, it suffers, obviously, from age and could use a restoration. But it's still worth getting, and they do have Abbott and Costello. I think it's in 2 sets, right, Paul? Volume 1 and Volume 2 with all the films?
Yeah, it's. I think it's in Volume 1, yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's in Volume 1, and it's okay, but it's not as pristine as it could be. But let's talk about that. That is, I don't think we're giving away a whole lot of spoilers, but Abbott and Costello are in a situation where they get kidnapped, in effect, by a gangster who's fleeing the police, and they're in the same car, and the gangster gets shot and killed. And it turns out that he has his will on him, and because he didn't trust anybody that was part of his gang, he said in his will that he would simply give all of his estate to whoever was with him when he died. Well, that happens to be Abbott and Costello. So they inherit this basically this hunting lodge, which is really a haunted house, and end up spending a stormy night there. But there are some great, and it's also one of the very first Evelyn Ankers films. Evelyn Ankers was the reigning horror heroine at Universal in the 1940s, and she's in all kinds of stuff. On and on you could go. The Wolf Man and Ghost of Frankenstein and Weird Woman, so on and so forth. But one of her very first films, she's British, is Hold That Ghost. But Richard Carlson is kind of the young doctor in that. And you've got all these routines where, Costello was scared out of his wits, and he played that very well. And it introduces the first time the routine of the moving candle.
Right.
And they bring that back in Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein. You know, the candle's moving because Dracula is starting to open the casket and it
Yep.
slides. And then they did that on their TV show.
I remember that.
Which is hysterical, you know.
Yeah. And,
and-
Universal was very smart because obviously they were thinking on a broader scale because, as you well know, they tried to make these films not just slapstick comedy, but very entertaining for even people who weren't particularly that interested in comedy. I mean, you had the Andrews sisters in the beginning and also in many other films doing a number at a nightclub and so forth. So that, they were kind of played off as musical comedies in many ways.
Yeah,
And,
right.
so if you don't like the comedy, you'll enjoy the musical. And so it was a very entertaining film.
Well, that was the Deanna Durbin influence.
Right.
You know, that so they were combining musicals and comedy and horror. And it works in most cases. Even though you've got a forgettable film like The Black Cat, by and large, it does work. And when they, in 1942, when they go to start doing the Sherlock Holmes films, they, again, bring up some of these same points, you know, the
Right.
old dark houses, and
Yeah.
kind of almost cross the line into horror films with things like The Scarlet Claw and The Creeper and so forth.
Right. I have to say, as a minister, there's certainly a very different kind of approach for many people today. Whereas, today's films, we're talking about a lighthearted comedy. Of course, there is darker horror, but there is a lot of popularity today with certain groups of people who will go into places, whether they're houses or other areas, where they actually are trying to seek out through different ways to contact entities, spirits, or whatever you want to call them. And I think my own feeling is a word of warning. I can remember back in 1972, as a new believer, a woman that was holding seances in her home called me because her mother was coming to my Bible study and said, "Please come to my home because at night I'm having this hand actually choking me." Well, I didn't go, and I talked to the mother of the daughter the next Bible study, and she said, "Yeah, I'm concerned." And so we left it at that. And the following week, the mother called me and said, "Come to my house because I felt a hand on my daughter's throat when she was screaming." So I said to myself, whoa, here I am, a new believer. I did go there, had some prayer, and through Christ, this girl was delivered. But it was, there's a reality there. This is not fun, folks. Be careful. When people invite you to go to these things, I know another woman that went and suddenly it was all fun. And on the way home, something she said was following her. She went home that night. Something was in her living room and literally threw her mother down the stairs. There's some reality behind this. But today we're talking about some fun stuff like Halloween or whatever. And I have no problem with these comedies, but there is a serious reality behind it.
Yeah, needless to say, no spoiler alert, but in both these films, the House on Haunted Hill and Hold That Ghost, there are no real ghosts.
Yeah.
I
do believe in spooks. I do believe in spooks.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's been a fun review going over these two films because both of us have watched these films I don't know how many times, and we still enjoy them, and I think you will too. So until next time,
there's all kinds of great little bits. They did use some of this in their TV show, but little things that are kind of corny, but they're still funny, where there's an echo in the house, and so they happen to say, hello, so Carcella's going to try it, and he goes, "Merry Christmas." The echo comes back, "Happy New Year."
Yeah, right. and the very title is kind of ludicrous because you cannot hold a ghost.
No, right. Yeah.
At least the ghost that I understand. Okay, well, listen, this has been a lot of fun. And until we meet again, this is Ralph
And Paul?
from 10 Times the Terror, and we'll catch you next time. So take care.
Right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 times the terror.
the podcast.
You are impossible.
Ralph, your well-intentioned is totally wrong. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.